My name is Meredith Lynch Underwood and I am the Cultural Collections Enhancement Manager at the Australian Museum. I'm coming to you today from the unceded lands of the Gadigal people, who I acknowledge as the first peoples and traditional custodians of the land and waterways on which the Australian Museum stands. Our First Nations-led programs are rethinking cultural collection enhancement and museum digitisation practice. The Australian Museum mission is to ignite wonder, inspire debate and drive change. Our vision is to be a leading voice for the richness of life, the earth and culture in Australia and the Pacific. Furthermore, the Australian Museum commits to being a strong advocate for First Nations cultures and to continuing to develop world-leading science, collections, exhibitions and education programs. The Museum is committed to the prioritisation of First Nations voices. So how do we do this? And what does this mean for collection digitisation? For some additional context, with 22 million collection items and scientific specimens, the Australian Museum is not only a dynamic source of reliable scientific information, but also an important site of cultural exchange and learning. The Australian Museum's Cultural Collection Enhancement project comprises an array of digitisation programs, including digital collection registration, collection photo documentation, collection and storage barcoding, registration record documentation enhancement, as well as a special program of traditional cultural knowledge holder consultation works which are enhancing the collection in collaboration with First Nations communities from across Australia and the Pacific. As the name Cultural Collection Enhancement implies, our programs distinguish themselves from the natural sciences collections digitisation as cultural collection focused and First Nations-led programs of work. I manage the digitisation and collections enhancement programs for the following 4 museum collections. 1. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islands Cultural Collection. 2. Aboriginal Archaeology. 3. Pacifica Cultural Collections. And 4. World Cultures Collection. I undertake this work in partnership with each of the specialist collection managers and under the direction of Laura McBride, the Director of First Nations here at the Museum. Our team collaborates with First Nations communities across the region because the Australian Museum recognises that its collections hold the heritage of Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander and Pacifica peoples from many nations and clans. In our work, we seek to understand individual access and use conditions of the diverse cultural objects in the collections, to gather more cultural knowledge to enhance the description of the cultural heritage, and to create channels to better facilitate virtual and real access in a culturally appropriate manner. The vision for a newly created rich object format that is the sum of digitised object and metadata in relation to actual collection material is achieved through in-depth consultation and outreach. First Nations peoples representing themselves and their cultures at the Australian Museum. So, is cultural collection enhancement in a colonial establishment such as Australia's first museum a contradiction in terms? I suggest no, as with powerful First Nations leadership from my colleagues Laura McBride, Director First Nations, Mariko Smith, Head of First Nations Collections and Research, Melissa Malu, Head of Pacifica Collections and Engagement, always grounded by community participatory collaboration, cultural collection enhancement has fast become a very successful program of museum collection digitisation. Key to our program's success is removing data bias and mistruths in collection records. Additionally, to quote Auntie Grace Kinsella, "Museums have sticks, we have stories. Without the stories, museums only have sticks." The culmination of digitisation, registration, inventory works, barcoding, culturally appropriate cataloguing and community consultation is seeing the Australian Museum become a leader in how it cares for and interprets its cultural collections across all its channels, including the AM website, exhibitions programs, education, and importantly, in record keeping. The creation of over 500,000 new high-quality digital assets will benefit these museum activities, as well as our remote cultural consultation and digital repatriation works. The Cultural Collection Enhancement programs contributed to the creation of world-class exhibitions and experiences, another of the Australian Museum's corporate strategic priorities. Our programs will increase the volume of First Nations knowledges the museum holds on record from Australia and across the Pacific by adding First Nations intangible heritage and traditional knowledge to its collections data. Prior to the commencement of Cultural Collection Enhancement programs, collections metadata within the museum collections pertain to Western anthropological classifications of cultural objects and often emphasised information about collectors. Our programs support the museum to enhance the records of previously collected cultural materials. We are designing and building technology infrastructure simultaneous to digitising collections imbued with Indigenous knowledges that are highly sought after by the public, by researchers, students and First Nations people alike. These enhanced records restore traditional knowledge associated with the collections. This is invaluable as truth-telling saturated collection data and digital assets simultaneously create opportunities for improved collection management and delivery of world-class exhibitions, public programs and education. To wrap up, in our first 2 years, the Cultural Collection Enhancement team has established world-class digitisation studio space and registration, inventory and digital asset workflows, a barcoding program, First Nations-led community consultation practices, while delivering decolonised digital assets for museum cultural collection materials. Importantly, the Cultural Collection Enhancement collaboration with stakeholder communities has resulted in significant data improvements as well as registration record documentation cleanup outcomes. In Indigenous language names alone, 4,708 cultural collection objects have had their names in their own language reassociated and inserted into the Australian Museum digital catalogue records. This presentation has reflected on the Australian Museum's prioritisation of First Nations voices, commitment to community engagement and collection care, and explored the responsibilities and changing approaches in the museum to collaborate with First Nations peoples in the delivery of large-scale digitisation, improved access and essential truth-telling. While responsibility exists at collecting institutions to follow best practice guidelines, in many world-class leading collecting institutions, inherited collecting practices and legacy data bias has resulted in incomplete records. The work of the Smarter Modern institution is to improve the status of collection documentation to safeguard cultural collections' tangible, material and intangible heritage. 2 years into Cultural Collection Enhancement, this was just the beginning. The next 2 years will solidify our workflows and our programs will expand from First Nations Pacifica focus into First Nations Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander digitisation. Lessons learned will be applied. Collection management system development and redesign will continue to allow for ongoing steps towards Indigenous data sovereignty. We will expand use case and support development of collections online, more permanent galleries, more community collaboration efforts across Australia and the Pacific, and we will support the establishment of a new Cultural Collections Research Centre. In our first 2 years, we have changed the way the institution generates digital assets. Prioritisation of First Nations voice in the associated collection metadata means data is now structured with traditional knowledge and facts prioritised over unknowns, untruths and colonial ownership details in the collection catalogue and in registration record keeping. We are breaking new ground at Australia's first museum, leaving the collection far better than we found it by removing data bias and mistruths in collection records. Committing to our vision to be a leading voice for the richness of life, the earth and culture in Australia and the Pacific.